Hi.
Hi.
And we're back.
Oh
Yay.
my God! Yes, we are.
It's been a hot minute.
A little bit.
Yeah.
I
Hello.
think the last episode we did was 2 months ago. I think.
Something like that. It's
Yeah,
been a while.
it's
We
been
were
a
busy.
while. Yeah.
We were busy.
Yeah.
So, hello and
Yes.
hello to people
Hi,
listening
everybody.
or
How are
watching,
you?
either one.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for tuning back in to
Yes.
the Sex Nerd podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Josh Corum.
I'm Victoria Hartman.
And so today
Yes.
we're going to change it up a little bit. We're not going to do a study.
Right.
We're going to talk about a little more conjecture, a little more just conversation
Yep.
On a topic
Yep.
that I see a lot. It's not a topic that's really discussed very much,
No.
but I don't see it discussed really at all.
Okay.
So much. I'm sure there's some places, but it's something that's happening that's I think if people were a little more aware of it, I'm interested in how it will impact some of the sexual communities or sexual politics that we're having in this country and in Europe and abroad and other places like that. And
Actually, when you brought it up to me, I was my eyebrow went up, and I'm like, that's not anything that I've heard anyone talk about, at least on social media or in journal papers or whatever. Yeah.
And so the buzzword description of what we're going to be talking about is the desexualization of sexual communities for the purposes of legitimation.
That's right. It sounds like we're talking about the mechanization of sexuality in the future. So
Something.
Not quite.
So to translate that, it's that sexual communities like LGBT groups, even kink groups, things like that, are toning down their overt or explicit sexual behavior,
Right.
or foregoing it completely for other narratives like a love narrative
Or marriage.
or marriage,
Right, which would be an extension of love. Yeah.
for the purposes, I think, for political agenda.
Right.
And not saying they're wrong doing this. Well,
we have to. Okay. So before you get too far ahead, we have to talk about the roots at first.
yeah.
Right. And then we can get into how it's evolved politically. Right.
Right. So legitimation is essentially like legitimizing. Like, is this a legitimate identity? Is this a legitimate group?
Yeah.
Acknowledging them on a political level.
To appeal
kind of
to the mainstream.
Right.
Right. Okay.
But first, before we get into that, we've been gone for a while.
Yeah. What have you been up to?
All the things.
Well, I know you've been on a plane of some kind, almost nonstop for what, 6 weeks?
It's been a while. So, what? I don't even remember when our last show was. Was it September or October?
October?
So, yeah, maybe October.
Yeah.
So we had men's roller derby champs in Denver.
That's right. I think you had just come back from that.
Had I just come back from
Yeah.
that? So then I had Team USA trials for
Right.
men's roller derby.
Right.
And then like a few days later, I flew to Okinawa.
Yes.
And then flew to Thailand for a week.
I thought you were there for 2.
No, it was gone for 2 weeks.
Oh, okay.
Like 2.5 weeks. But it was
Okay.
only in Thailand for a week.
Okay.
In the Phi Islands, or the PP Islands, however you want to describe it.
Okay.
That's the one where part of the beach, the Leonardo DiCaprio movie in the 90s, was filmed there.
Oh.
And the actual beach that they found was in an island just next to where I was. It's on Maya Island.
Okay.
But I was on, which is one of the smaller islands.
Oh.
You could, so it's like a national park.
Oh.
But it was closed. It had been closed for a while.
Oh.
Because there were too many tourists and too much damage done. People leaving garbage.
It's amazing how people so identify and pursue pop culture to the point where it's destructive.
Yeah. One of my colleagues studies like I guess you could say pop culture tourism
Oh.
of like based in movies and things
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
Like she does a lot of work with the Mob Museum here in town.
Okay.
And she's, yeah, so there's places that people go and visit because it was in a movie.
Yep.
Like Forks, Washington.
Oh yeah.
You know,
I remember
that. Was big.
Yeah. Because I lived in Eugene, Oregon at the time.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Really?
Oh, Forks was not far. You know, it was maybe half a day's drive, drive. Yeah.
If you don't know what Forks is from, good
Right.
on you for not knowing that. But it's from the Twilight series.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's where Bella lived and met Edward.
Yeah. Yeah. But there's a lot of that tourism.
Yeah.
So it was a beautiful place. The Fifi Islands, beautiful place.
Nice.
There were some really interesting things.
Did you roll around with an elephant this time?
I didn't.
Okay.
I didn't wrestle an elephant. There weren't any on the island.
Okay.
Like you could walk the length of the island in like an hour.
Oh, okay.
Walk.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't very big.
Okay.
But there were a lot of resorts. And I had a great time taking pictures of stray cats. They had
I did see that.
tons of stray cats because they and the locals love them.
Oh.
Like you'll have a stray cat or two that just sits in a business, like sits out the door of a business, and they get fed, but they also help with the pests and things like that.
Yeah.
So they're just like part of the community.
Oh wow.
And I took so many pictures of awesome stray cats, and they're super nice. They're not like stray cats here where they attack you or
They're
run away.
feral, okay.
Oh no, yeah, they're feral, they're stray, but they don't care.
Huh.
Like they absolutely do not care about anything because they're well taken care of.
Yeah, yeah.
And they just chill and hang out, and it's hot and humid. So
Right.
and they just
Nice.
like one of the breakfast places, there were like 2 or 3 kittens.
Oh.
Yeah, like the hotel I was at had an outdoor breakfast spot, and they were like baby kittens that would just like mew hang out with you while you ate. It was great. It was the best part of my morning.
Nice. Yes, you are a cat person.
I'm a cat person.
You do. Yeah.
So
Yes.
I took pictures of cats.
Nice.
Yeah. But that's been, and then I got food poisoning, which was awesome.
Yeah, I saw your Facebook post about
Yeah.
that. Would you call it Thailand tummy?
Thailand tummy.
Oh, you poor thing.
Yeah. I thought
And that
was
was like the
die.
day before you had to fly.
Well, no. So it hit me on the way so I went back to Okinawa before I came back here.
Oh, okay.
And I was there for 24 hours in a hotel, and I was either in bed or on the toilet.
Oh.
It hit me just as I was landing in Okinawa.
Oh.
So I managed to make it to my hotel and
That was it.
checked it, and it was over.
Thank God you made it to your hotel.
Yeah.
I've had a moment like that, and that was a hotel just that you lock yourself away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was. I thought I was dying.
Oh.
I was like this, and well, actually, I didn't. I knew I would be fine. What my concern was they weren't going to let me on the plane to come back here
If you were sick.
because I was sick.
Right.
If you have a fever, things like that, they have some pretty heavy quarantine protocols over there because I don't know, diseases and
Sure,
stuff
of
like that.
course,
So
yeah.
I was worried that they were going to be like, "Oh no,
Yeah.
you can't get off this plane."
Right,
So
right.
because actually there was a guy who also was sick on the plane coming back from Thailand, but he didn't make it. He got sick on the plane,
Oops.
and they wouldn't let us off the plane for. It took them a little while because they had to quarantine all of us for a little bit.
And you're already getting sick.
And I'm already getting sick.
Oh,
Yeah, it was
God.
it was bad news bears,
Oh, God.
but I survived.
It's
I'm
like
just-
my worst nightmare. I'm going to Iceland in September. Part work, part pleasure. To go to the Phallological Museum, and then most likely I'm going on a 2-week Antarctic cruise with some friends of mine.
Sounds chilling.
Yeah, and that's the one thing I fear. I fear illness while traveling
Sure.
because
But you're traveling to some pretty.
well, I mean, the ship is a luxury ship,
Yeah.
and it's Greenland, Iceland, so it should be okay, but just the experience of being ill while you're traveling is just
Yeah,
the
and
only place you want to be is in your bed at
Right.
home. Yeah.
and it doesn't matter like where you go.
Mm-hmm.
You could go to the most pristine place. It's
Doesn't- I
just
know.
traveling can get you sick
Yes. Yes.
because people are disgusting.
Mm.
They're gross on planes. They're gross.
Yeah.
They're dirty. They're gross.
I know. Some of the pictures I see online with people like scratching their butts or putting their feet on your lap or drooling on you, and I'm like, buh.
Now I will take.
I've had some. I can't complain about flying. I've never had a bad flying experience that I can recall. Not anything like some of the things I see. I get sometimes you have an annoying passenger that talks at you too much, but other than that, no.
Yeah. Luckily for me, I have resting asshole face,
Oh,
so people do not talk to me.
okay,
It's not a thing.
okay.
Well, yeah. Only the rare occasion will somebody talk to me.
Right, right.
Which actually happened on my way to Indiana to visit family for Thanksgiving.
Okay.
So we board the plane,
Mm.
and it's full flight, and there's a young lady sitting next to me, another young lady by the window, and I'm in the aisle because I'm huge.
Yeah.
And we're sitting at the gate for a good 15, 20 minutes, something, whatever,
Yeah.
Came up.
Yeah.
And this is Southwest, and I love Southwest. Southwest is a great airline.
Yeah.
And as we're pulling away from the gate, the young lady sitting next to me flags down a flight attendant and says, "Is there any way I can get off this airplane?"
Okay.
Yeah. I'm like, you couldn't have brought this up like 10, 15 minutes ago?
Especially if you're just sitting there.
Yeah. And she was crying. She was texting someone. We think it had to do with a boy.
Yeah, yeah.
Something. But I'm thinking, oh no, Buttercup, you're just gonna have to
Go to Indiana.
tuck it up and we're gonna make this flight.
Right.
I was wrong.
No, really.
They went back to the gate and let this poor lady off the airplane.
Wow.
Yeah. And admittedly, you don't
Well,
want
you don't want a hysterical person on. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
But at a certain point,
Right.
you're holding us up
Yeah.
by a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
By that time, we were like almost an hour late leaving, but we made up for good time, so it wasn't
That's
too
good.
bad.
That's good.
Yeah, I never had that happen before. It was so weird.
Huh.
And of course, they announced that we were going back for someone, and
That's gonna make it worse for her.
yeah,
Yeah.
but there was a moment. So, because everybody's looking around, all accusatory and angry because we
Yeah.
have to go back to the gate.
Right.
And I knew it. I was like, and I told her, I was like, "Are you ready? Because you're gonna get some hate coming up this plane.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna get scowls and stuff like that." But I had the aisle seat, so I had to stand up first. And there was gonna be a moment where they were gonna be like, "This dude,"
Yeah.
I was gonna get the hate, but I knew no one was gonna say shit to me.
Yeah.
Was not gonna happen.
Right.
So I put on my good scowl face.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
What? You say something, please say something, because I felt bad for the lady, for the young girl. I was like,
Yeah.
that sucks.
Yeah.
So sure enough, I stand up and people are like, and then she got up and
Right.
yeah.
Wow.
So that was fine. But I made a friend on the airplane because we were talking about it the whole way. What the fuck?
Yeah.
Why did that happen?
Nice.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
So never seen people dragged off planes. Never seen anybody volunteer to get off a plane.
I've never seen either.
Yeah.
So
I don't know.
I live a sheltered life, I guess.
It's okay. Not something you need to
Cool.
say.
I can't say that I've had. Well, I guess I've had an interesting couple of months.
Yeah.
In other ways, I'm a workaholic. I love what I do, and I just keep taking on more. And so I was approached by a fellow scholar who, I guess you could say he's a criminologist of. He studies necrophiles, but offending ones, and I studied non-offending ones. And so, after communicating back and forth for a while, he invited me to write a couple of papers with him, which I'm really excited about, because I don't get access to actual cases. I get access to those who haven't offended. and just being able to look at those. So we're gonna do a paper on like cannibalism in Germany and some interesting stuff that I really could sink my teeth into. And
was that a pun?
Very funny.
That was nice.
That's good. Huh? I didn't even like. I was like, even not even planning that. And the fangs are speaking. And then I'm still writing a paper on. I'm part of this group of of scholars who are studying pornography, and I have a paper that I'm revising that looks like it's gonna be published. So I'm working on that.
Good.
And this is the week. I talked about this the last time we did our episode. This is the week of renovations at the house.
At your house.
At my house. Oh my God. I am juggling so many things: contractors, moving trucks, just and doing some DIY stuff. So I'm sometimes amazed at how I can multitask, which is not a favorite thing to do. So but I'm really excited about the end result. So
I applaud you. I can't.
It's been interesting. I did the countertops myself. I've done the backsplashes myself. I redid all the trim on the doors. All the doors were painted and I mean, I had some help, but as far as the countertops and all that stuff, I did that all by myself, and it's been very empowering, surprisingly.
Has it?
Yeah. Well, I had an ex-husband who he did construction and housing and stuff like that, and so I learned a lot from him. So it's not anything I'm afraid of.
See,
the only thing that I'm afraid of is breaking my nails.
I go the other way. My father was a construction worker. He was a carpenter, and my both brothers, have worked construction.
Okay.
Like my younger brother runs his handyman business.
Yeah.
Back in Indiana.
Yeah.
Great work ethic. He makes great money. It's awesome. But my dad, growing up, loved fixer-uppers.
Oh.
That was his bread and butter.
And that's how you moved around a lot?
Yeah, we moved around. Well, he moved around a lot.
Okay.
But my mom had the same house. And she did some work there, too. But my dad loved fixer-uppers. The problem is he worked construction, so he oftentimes would let things go at home because he was tired.
Right.
And I get that. Like, you don't want to do your job on the weekends.
It's like being a mechanic and you don't want to fix your own car.
Yeah. But because of that, we lived with, exposed like plywood on the floor, plastic in places, that kind of stuff. Like, I refuse to do any work on a house myself. And I refuse to move into a place that's like has potential.
Okay.
Unless it's paint.
Okay.
Other than that, fuck that.
Okay.
Like, I refuse. Like, it has to be move-in ready for me. Like, and I will throw up my princess tiara for that. Like, no. Like, am I ready to move in? Can I just insert my shit and go? Like, I am way too busy to like, the bathroom needs remodeling. Well, I'm going to go stay in a fucking hotel.
Okay.
Like...
Now, see, I grew up in very stable homes. My parents, I lived in one house till I was 10 or just about 10. I mean, I split my time between Germany and Maine, but Maine was the same house. And then once we moved to Germany, my mom and I moved to Germany full time, it was one apartment until we moved back to the States 6 years later. And then it was one apartment. So I didn't move around a lot. And none of the houses were fixer-uppers. They just were. And then my ex-husband was, had grown up in construction, and he taught me all about fixer-uppers. So I actually am excited. I get excited about it. Yeah. I don't want to do it all the time. I can do it like once every 8-10 years. But it's been fun.
I'd rather just burn it down and get something new.
Well, because before I got into academics, I wanted to be an interior decorator or interior designer, right? And so that was the career path I was on until I stumbled on academics and went like, oh, I love academics. But that interior designer never went away. So it's something I dabble in at home from time to time. So
yeah, no, I don't have that at all.
I could get why. So,
All right.
yeah. So,
So,
where do you want to begin?
so I want to set, not to like jar people of like, oh yeah, we're doing a sex podcast.
Yeah.
Remember?
I was just thinking the same thing.
Yeah. So I think I wanna lay some like theoretical framework
Okay.
for how I came about this kind of thought process or
What's
this theory.
in your head, Josh?
Yeah. So the chair of my dissertation,
Yes.
committee chair, and good friend Barb Rentz.
Yes, I've heard she's amazing.
She is amazing.
Yes.
At the University of Nevada, Las Vegas,
Yes.
at UNLV.
Yeah.
Wrote a book with Dr. Crystal Jackson, who's now one of her grad students, who's now in John Hopkins, maybe.
Oh, wow.
She's out East Coast.
Nice.
And then Catherine Hasback, who's also at UNLV.
Mm-hmm.
They all co-wrote this book, The State of Sex,
Yes.
which is tourism, sex, and sin in the new American heartland. This is really about Vegas, right?
Okay.
So it's about
I was like,
the
Vegas
sex
is
industry.
the heartland? What?
Yeah. It was really
Okay.
it's like the sex industry in Las Vegas. But the underlying tone of everything was showing how gambling, as it got more popular, because we used to have sex work here. We used to have prostitution here.
That's right.
And as gambling went up, and in a lot of other places, as gambling got more popular,
yeah.
it needed to prove its legitimacy,
Yes.
right? That it wasn't a vice. So
Gambling.
Gambling.
Okay.
So in order to do that, one of the ways is to rename it. Right. So it's not gambling anymore.
It's gaming.
It's gaming.
It's gaming.
Right. We don't have a gambling institution. We have a gaming institution.
Right.
And then the other way was to distance itself from other vices, primarily sex. So this book documents sex work.
Alcohol wasn't in the equation at the time?
A little bit.
Okay.
I mean, you have that during Prohibition, but more so sex work.
Oh, okay.
Pushing out of sex work away from, and what I mean by that, prostitution, right?
Yes.
Pushing away prostitution, it's not legal in Vegas.
No.
So
in
people
Clark County at all.
Right, in our Clark County and all. People seem to forget that.
Yeah,
They're like, So if you're watching and have never been from Vegas, it's not legal here.
No.
It's legal outside of Vegas.
Like in Nye County.
In Nye County. The closest one is Pahrump. That's this town that's closest to that has the brothels.
Yes.
So, and even still today, you see.
Well, and they just passed an ordinance in Pahrump that prohibits billboards advertising the brothels, and that's somewhat new because they've been advertising brothels. I mean, I lived out there briefly in the early 2000s, and that's a new thing.
Yeah. I think even today you see the pushing away of strip clubs. There aren't any strip clubs on the Strip.
No.
There aren't any.
I mean, some of the shows could pass for that, but
there's like the topless.
The topless reviews.
But they're.
There's I think one left.
Yeah, there's Sexy at Westgate, but that's not on the Strip technically.
Oh, okay.
And there's like one other
Train.
Yeah, there's the Train. I think there's another at Tropicana or Hooters, but again, that's like just off the Strip. Like your major hotels, I don't think have topless reviews anymore.
No,
there's Zumanity, but that's a Cirque show.
That's a Cirque show.
And it's very little
risque.
Nudity. It's more risque than like. Yeah. But even so, the strip clubs, they're not on the Strip. They're all.
I mean, because the last topless one was Jubilee.
Was it?
Wasn't it?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if Jubilee was topless. I didn't watch it.
I think so. A long time ago.
Yeah. So even your strip clubs that are just north of the Strip, like the, Olympic Gardens, that shut down a couple years ago.
Well, but that was because of internal mismanagement.
Sure.
And investor issues and stuff. It wasn't necessarily because of the strip club.
But there's no strip clubs being put in its place.
That is what's really weird.
Yeah. And
Olympic Gardens has never reopened. But that might be some kind of court thing. I don't know.
Could be. I think the closest one on the Strip. Now there's stuff off the Strip, just a few blocks. All the big ones are behind the Strip. They're tucked away.
Well, we have Sapphire just down the road from us. We're like one block over from the Strip.
Yeah, and you can see from the highway, but you can't see it from the Strip. And
No.
they actually just passed an ordinance about, I should have read it before today, but an ordinance about the billboard trucks.
Yeah, what I read that article, but they weren't necessarily talking about. They used an image showing the adult stuff, but they didn't address that directly in the article. Yeah, it was just about how they're distracting and how they clog up traffic.
They do, and they're really bright. Now they're using all those like high-end LED lights. And
Right.
Fuck,
So
blinding
the article. They were salacious in their image choice.
Yeah.
But it wasn't. It was about how it's distracting and clogging up traffic
But I
because
don't
there's
think-
so many of them.
But I don't think that was an accident.
Of course not.
No.
No, that was intentional.
Yeah, Vegas is becoming far less salacious. So my
Yes.
theory behind this
And we
is,
talked about that in a previous episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My theory behind this is that, or not theory, but working with her theory is that, we for the purposes of like political recognition, people have to distance themselves from explicit sex
Yes.
in order for that acknowledgement to happen.
Well, and we talked about this in a previous episode about our new governor, who, as a city commissioner on the city council, was advocating for our sports stadium and so forth,
Yeah.
and was already pressuring local businesses to abandon any kind of explicit sexuality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so with that same framework, it's a political maneuver.
Yeah.
Really, it's political maneuvering.
Yep.
You see that in sexual identity groups, sexual groups,
Okay.
LGBT groups or LGB groups. I think you do see it in trans groups too. Definitely in BDSM, definitely in poly communities.
Yes.
It's all across the board.
Yes.
Is the separation of the
Sex.
acknowledgement of explicit sex
Yes.
for the purposes of like political power,
Yeah.
political recognition.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have these examples, right? This and it doesn't, you don't have to dive into them super deep to find. They're really easy. They're but it's like an underlying component to all these things.
Right.
No one like explicitly comes out and says this is why, but it's like reading between the lines. So even if you start with like gays and lesbians, right?
Well, let's do a little bit of a history of, if you're talking about a political movement, okay?
Right.
Originally, the pursuit of legitimation for lesbian and gay communities was about a freedom from violence
Yeah.
and stigmatization.
Mhm.
Okay, so that they're basically, it started out as the pursuit of liberty, justice, and liberty, and not to be pathologized as a lesbian or gay person,
Right.
or even a trans person. I mean, if we're talking about Stonewall.
Yeah.
Right.
Because yeah, and I was going to do this earlier, but I think maybe we should do it now. The idea. So people at home may not know this, but sexual cultures or sexual groups, and a lot of just non-dominant identified groups often follow the same path of starting from sin or sickness, right?
Yes.
Or both.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Well, yeah. Yeah.
right. But it's behavior. The behavior is the problem for those in power.
Yeah.
Religion, medicine,
Mainstream.
psychology.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
The
it becomes,
gatekeepers.
Right.
Right.
we give them power to define us, as Foucault says, so they are defining what behaviors are either sin or sickness.
Right.
Right. So then because the homosexual, the heterosexual weren't established, or the homosexual behavior, heterosexual behavior was established first, and then you have the person, right, the homosexual, and then from there they get ostracized and shunned from the community, so they seek others like them and form their own community.
Right.
And while they're still engaging in this behavior, and the behavior is still being pathologized, just like you said, they're oppressed, there's violence towards them.
Right.
Um,
Because of their sexual behavior.
because of how their sexual behavior is framed by those in power to do so.
Right.
And then through their community, they gain more political traction.
Right.
Right. So they had a big step with Stonewall. Granted, there were a lot of trans folks and queer folks in Stonewall that get pushed aside
Yeah, they
for
get
their
erased.
narrative.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah.
So that is still very prevalent. I don't want to erase that either.
Yeah, yeah.
That is also still part of this equation. I'm just
Yes.
using gays and lesbians as my example
Which
right now.
which will point out why you're doing that in a little bit.
Right.
Yeah.
You have that becomes a violent reaction. Well, I hate to use the word violent. It is a physical reaction to the state, to police, really.
Yeah.
And then after that, it gets removed from the DSM in the 1970s.
That's right.
Homosexuality gets
Homosexuality is, yeah.
through political action.
Yes.
Community, political action, legitimation.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Or at the very least, depathologizing.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
But they still don't have the same access to rights and things like that.
Right.
And then you have the AIDS epidemic in the 80s. And that's where you start to see the push for same-sex marriage a lot. Was in the first bits was in the 80s.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because I think the government at the time was not making any room for services for. I think just the opposite. The Reagan administration was not recognizing the AIDS epidemic and any kind of government assistance because they identified it as a homosexual disease, and like specifically homosexual disease.
It was originally called GRIDS.
Right.
It was like gay-related immunodeficiency or something like that. Yeah. So
it was related to asexual behavior.
Right.
This disease.
Again, going back to the behavior.
The behavior, right.
And even in the 80s and 90s, there was that push for marriage for these equal rights. A lot of it had to do with being able to visit partners in hospitals.
In hospitals, right.
And like there's things like that.
Sure.
So there's this push for that. And I think the 2000s push was those people getting older as well, and having more.
Well, the
survivability
survivability of AIDS changed with medication.
Right.
I mean, nowadays, if you take PrEP, the likelihood of infection is almost nil. And if you are infected and you're on antiviral drugs, undetectable is what's the word? U equals U.
Yeah.
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 Yep.
So you have
untransmittable.
Right. So you have these changes in that in the environmental factors, but you still have the push for this what's been coined homonormativity, basically it's assimilation, to heteronormative behavior. This idea of marriage and family and domesticity and things like that.
I want to go off on a tangent for just a second before I forget, and we'll come back to this. I wonder what the future holds now with Truvada and its daughters and son, kind of medications that are coming out, how that'll change the view on marriage and sexual behavior, because now with PrEP and other medications, sexual behavior, the risk of transmission from sexual behavior has been technically erased. So how is that going to change the conversation around same-sex marriage and so forth? It's something that I don't think we really that we can anticipate yet.
No,
right.
I think it.
And I don't want to go too far off track. It's just something.
I think there are still a lot of side effects, like very unpleasant side effects that come with Truvada. And if they can reconcile some of those side effects, and if they're able to market it to straight folks,
which they're already attempting to do. I think the government.
They're trying.
The government program for Truvada just kicked in, I think, this last week.
Did it?
Yep.
Wow.
So if you don't have prescription medication, whether or not you're in a high-risk group, from what I understand, you can get Truvada free of cost now.
Wow.
Yes. And that was basically surprisingly enough, the Trump administration's attack against AIDS was to make Truvada available to those without prescription medication at no cost. Hetero, homosexual, doesn't matter.
Wow.
Yeah. And I don't recall there being any kind of a high risk group criteria.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see how that gets, how that'll impact us in like 5 to 20 years.
Because the homosexual community in the adult industry has been using these medications for a while. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Anyway, so back to what you were saying.
Yeah. So you have this push for the love narrative, right?
The love narrative.
That's really what's come about.
Yes.
Is the replacing free to do what we want with free to love whom we want.
Free from violence to do what we want.
Right.
To free to love. Right.
Because behavior is no longer pathologized,
Uh-huh.
so to speak. I mean, there's still some contingents in this, like layman people who, whatever.
Yeah.
Who still can't seem to break away from that. But now it's about love. And I think in some respects, the love narrative is a resistance to medicalization, because medicalization has such a negative impact on gays and lesbians, particularly gays, but lesbians and trans folks. Like,
yeah, sure.
Anything that resembles medicalization.
Yeah. Well, because especially the psychological community has not done right by them in the past.
They still don't.
Okay.
They still don't in a lot of respects, in my opinion. I'm sorry. If you're a psych person, you're in this, like, but we know psych people who are like, yeah, it's a thing.
Right.
They're still trying to find normal. You're not going to find it.
I think, and we see this, as an example in the sex addiction argument. You have those on, a lot of research is coming out now that shows that sex addiction's not a thing.
It's not a thing.
Right.
And porn too.
Right. Porn addiction, sex addiction. But you still have those in the medical community who are like, well, but wait, addiction's a thing, and brain scans and that kind of stuff. And that's the medical community pathologizing this kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Even in my own research on hooking up, it's explicit sexual behavior,
right?
And it's still seen as a negative behavior, even though my research is showing that these people have positive experiences hooking up, and all this stuff. Phone's ringing.
Sorry, we're at the museum and it has to go to voicemail. Sorry.
Okay.
We're busy here.
So that's one example, right? The gays and lesbian community
Yep.
is one example of, you can see the separation from the behavior. Because even in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, to some extent, you had this queer aspect of the gay community that were like, no, we need to change the dynamics of sex, of sexual behavior or sexual orientations to like move away from this binary of, gay and straight.
Right.
That wanted to break down those walls. They lost. They lost to the assimilation politics of marriage,
right?
The love narrative.
Well, and you see that playing itself out in a big way in poly communities, right? And you and I, as we were prepping for this, we're talking about the frustration around, being non-monogamous isn't necessarily or hasn't been about love. And the contrast to that is the swinger community. Right. But in the poly community, it's almost a negative when you are attracted to someone and it's not for the reasons of love.
Right.
Right. And there's the love narrative is they've latched onto that in a huge way.
Because it's about the relationships.
It's about the relationship.
Yeah.
It's not about sex. We're here to communicate and talk to each other and be together and share our love and share our homes and
share our Google calendars.
And share our calendars and stuff and negotiate time together. And if one lover doesn't have enough time, then you have to have a serious conversation about making time for one another. It can't. But sex is almost a taboo.
Right.
Yeah.
And when it comes to advertising that to other people, it's not about the sex. It's about the relationships, the connections, really pushing that agenda forward as the narrative that's being presented.
Right.
And I think it has, and again, I know we're kind of joking and jabbing at this, but it's.
I get it. Sexual attraction can feel
on a political level,
yeah.
it's not their fault. They have to do it this way.
Right.
I would love to see a different narrative where they don't, where they
Mhm.
can say, yeah, it's about loving multiple people, but it's also about being able to fuck multiple people
Right.
without the stigma.
Right.
So rather than addressing the stigma that,
Yeah.
the sex negative stigma
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
American society and a lot of Western culture society still has,
Yeah.
we are kind of circumventing it
Yeah.
with the love
The
narrative.
love narrative. Right.
You know, we were talking, one of the other areas too is the BDSM community.
Uh-huh.
Oh my God.
Oh, sex and BDSM are not. No, BDSM is about mental connections and sharing energies and
negotiation
everything.
and consent
Negotiation
and all
and consent, and has nothing to do with our genitals.
Right.
Yeah.
But you're right.
Mhm.
Nothing at all. Especially after 50 Shades of Grey. There
Yeah.
was a real big push about,
Yeah.
because that had some sex
Yeah,
in it.
well, okay, but to take the side of the kink community for a minute, 50 Shades of Grey wasn't exactly the best example
Sure.
of BDSM. So, okay.
Yeah.
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 But yeah, no, there was in the 90s during one of the Bush administrations when Ashcroft was the Attorney General, the adult industry willingly took any BDSM titles off of the shelves that had sex as an interplay.
Because it was about obscenity, right?
Of obscenity, yeah. And it never quite, I mean, you had kink.com that sort of brought that back. They were at the forefront of bringing back sex with kink. But it was a very slippery slope that they were walking this fine line. But the BDSM community, if you go to local play parties and stuff like that, it's about play and connection and energy exchange, not about genitals.
Right.
So
I also think you see that as a reflection of the professionalism of BDSM, as in like professional dominatrixes and sex work.
Which is interesting because in Nevada, that is also illegal.
Right.
Even though there are no genitals involved, BDSM is illegal as a profession.
As a profession. And a behavior. Because it's illegal to flog people here.
Is it really?
I think that's what it was.
I thought it was just related to sex work.
Yeah.
Oh.
So I think and I think as a reflection of that, I think you're seeing far more different types of BDSM, professional BDSM pop up, like financial domination.
Yeah.
Master.
Findom, yeah.
Yeah, like master and slave things, like from a distance, like online BDSM.
Right.
Which, good for you. It doesn't make any sense to me. Having someone Skype in and tell me what to do, just not do it.
Right.
But then I pay you to do it. But it's part of the fantasy, right? It's part of, so there's really no sex involved. Like the person who's paying for it might masturbate, and you do see some people do masturbate in the dungeons post play. There is that release, that sexual release.
Right.
So I do struggle with that a little bit, and I've talked to BDSM people that do play, that like are a little more realistic about their play, and they're like, no, it's about fucking.
Right.
It's sexual.
Yeah.
They don't like to break those apart, and I think it's just different camps.
Yeah.
But the overall arching approach of the desexualization again is to make this behavior seem more palpable to
the mainstream.
To politicians, to white men in suits, that it's not this bad behavior because there's no sex involved. Yeah, we're beating the shit out of each other, but there's no sex involved.
Right. Well, and you see that in like Ann Hooper is our author who's done a lot of sort of photojournalistic kind of sex ed books, and I've seen some of it where she goes, okay, when we want to try a little bit of like ribbon tying up the wrists and stuff, but consent, and have this consent conversation and really check it. It's trying to soften it for vanilla couples who are bored. You know?
We talked about trans. I mentioned trans a minute ago, and while technically on a philosophical, political level, they have a different argument than the LGB. Actually, I'm gonna hold on.
Keep bi out of it because bi is still dealing
Right.
with erasure and stigmatization of binary choices
But I want to talk.
compared to pan.
But
we'll
let's
get
talk
back
about
to
that.
that.
No, let's talk about that real
Okay,
fast.
all right.
That I believe that this desexualization for legitimation is contributing to the bi erasure.
I believe that.
Yeah, because it's
because bisexual people, by identifying as bi, are in their own way saying, I'm attracted to junk, I'm attracted to people's genitals. Okay. And that's part of the equation, but pansexual means I'm attracted to people no matter what kind of genitals they have. Right.
to their
Right.
Right.
And
but it is about sex though. It's a sexual attraction.
Right.
Right. And
Yeah.
but again, I think there's the removal of that. I think even in their communities, there's an attempt to dial that back
I'm pan.
because it's about love.
It's about love.
Excuse me, I love both.
I love people.
Right.
Their genitals don't matter.
Right.
Yes, they do.
Yes, they do. But also, like with the love narrative, like again, it's following the lines with this like assimilation within heteroculture, which we have a problem with as well. Of this like love over sex, and then sex is secondary to love. It shouldn't matter. And I disagree.
What community do we not see that in? What community is not attempting to have a political identity?
Oh, the swinger community.
Swinger community,
for sure.
Right.
Because
it's a behavior.
Yeah, it is about fucking. Yeah.
Right.
And it's great.
Yep.
Like, I give them props. Again, I'm not coming down on the communities, these sexual communities, for having this political agenda, for having this approach.
No, because I think at its origins, it has honorable intentions.
But they're doing it because they have to.
Yeah.
It's an agenda. It's an approach because they have to.
They're whitewashing.
Right.
The sex part away.
Yeah.
Right.
Because they have to.
And that's why you don't see swingers forming political groups.
Right. And a lot of people don't. While some identify as swingers, like I'm a swinger. We're a couple that swings.
Yeah.
That's usually the how it's approached.
I think that the swinger community is being unflinchingly honest about what their interests are. This isn't related, but I just wish that the flow of alcohol wasn't so prevalent because of it's okay if you just want to fuck around as a couple or whatever in the swing community. You don't have to drink to make it okay, because to me it's almost like they're not drinking away the desire, or they're not trying to make it easier to respond to the desires they have. They're trying to, from my perspective, erase the stigma that goes with being a swinger, because it's not a political ideology or an identity.
And they do there is a lot of hiding,
right?
Because
well, if you have the city councilman and his stay-at-home mom wife going to the swingers club, well, they could potentially lose their job.
Right.
He could lose his job. They could lose their home or custody of their children if a family member finds. I get it. I get it.
And I think what you just said is really at the center of this is that discretion. Those like swinger people, because they see it as a behavior, apply the discretion. They're closeted, essentially. Because they can be. It's a behavior that they can put on the back burner.
Yep.
It's not something that you wear on your skin or your outward, it's not who you are.
Right.
And I think that's the difference, is that they can be stealth about it, not to borrow that term, whereas a lot of other sexual communities can't, or often hit that if they are stealth, if they are in the closet, like they don't function as well. There's a lot of mental health issues that can come of that. Whereas swingers, it's like, no, we're just normal people.
Yeah,
we
if
just
a
like
trans person stays closeted, it could seriously affect
Right.
their mental health in a bad way. But as a swinger,
Yeah. But so I think this is also happening in the trans community as well.
how?
With the very unpopular term of autogynephilia.
Oh,
I think on that level.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying all trans people are autogynephilic.
No.
This is not what I'm saying.
no.
Because it's a separate issue. Is those people who are autogynephilic, they get erased. Who identify as autogynephilic, they get erased from the trans community often because it's medicalized. Because,
Well, you kind of see,
and it's sexual.
you're even almost seeing that in the cross-dressing community.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a cross-dresser, you're embracing your feminine side. If you are someone who, there are some examples online of people who don female latex bodysuits.
Yeah.
And they get off on
For
it.
sexual arousal,
For sexual arousal.
Right.
And there's some debate about erotic target erroring or errors and whether or not that's legitimate. There's a whole conversation. Actually, Natalie on ContraPoints did a really good episode on autogynephilia and this conversation between Blanchard's autogynephilia and Julia Serrano's The Feminine Essence. And there's a response to it. I actually have a response to ContraPoints, but we won't get into that this time. But yeah, even you're right, in the trans community, if someone cross-dresses for the purposes of sexual arousal, that's bad.
Right.
And the trans community wants to completely distance itself from that.
But
Right.
because...
And I get it.
Right. Because of the...
The consequences.
Yeah. Because I think...
Because trans people are seen as perverts.
Right.
Right.
But,
especially trans women.
But it's often because of that medicalized narrative.
Yes, yes.
So you could almost say that the desexualization agenda or approach is like a resistance or reaction to medicalization. It's a resistance to medicalization because medicalization is pathologizing.
Right.
And sexuality is the behavior that is for those people who define us the problem.
Yeah.
So if I can remove the sex part of my identity,
Right.
so it's about love
Or
it's about
identity.
or the community,
Yeah.
you can't attack it,
Right.
or it's harder to attack.
Right.
But if we're talking about behavior, it's much easier to attack. It's much easier to
To
moralize,
pathologize,
and to point figures and say you're a pervert and you're
Yep.
bad.
Sin or sickness.
Right.
Yeah.
Sin or sickness.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's all based in, Gail Rubin's Thinking Sex. She talks about this. It's like, it's the sex negativity of American culture that we aren't able to do both.
Right.
We're not able to frame both the identity, the love, and the sex
right.
within the same political framework. Because immediately sex is suspect and sex is bad, and we will always attack it as this, unless it's man plus woman equals baby.
Yeah.
Like everything else is vice, everything else is abnormal and bad.
Yeah.
Right. So where do we go from here? Like I want to reiterate again. Not that I'm afraid of being canceled, because I have nothing to cancel, first off. There's no part of me out there that can really be canceled yet.
Yeah. You won't get any lecturing gigs at any prestigious universities, just FYI.
I don't think that's going to happen.
Okay.
Anyway.
I got canceled like 2 years ago.
I want to reiterate that I'm not attacking these communities for desexualizing themselves.
No, well, they've been put in a position to where they've kind of had to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like I think people, even in the communities, don't see it as much.
Right.
And people outside those communities in normal society definitely don't see it.
Well, and they're facing hostile governments, hostile medical boards, and the medical profession in general,
and violence, and just in normal society or in everyday society.
Well, and being ostracized from their families, they're being fired from their sure.
Yeah, so they're forced into this framework, this political framework, and it's terrible because it has an effect on everyone else.
Well, and I have to wonder, and I'm not trying to come down on any of these communities, but I have to wonder how much of that contributes to victim culture.
Oh,
Well, if you don't love me, you are committing violence against me.
no, I don't think it's that, because that's like individual people that do that.
I think it's individual people, and but I'm saying like these narratives. I wonder how much it tracks people who would exploit that with people that are already struggling for legitimation.
Yeah,
Okay.
I can see that.
Yeah.
But
I mean, that's my question.
yeah.
Like, how much is there interplay there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think on a greater scale, just like, you know, the narrative of toxic masculinity impacts men too, like this desexualization framework, political framing also impacts straight people, because again, we're still having to follow these very formulaic sexual guidelines,
Right.
unless you have the cultural capital to hide, like swingers do,
Right.
you know, that don't need to, you know, wave their freak flags. Suddenly, again, sex gets put on the back burner. It's not something that's important, or, you know, it's secondary to love. It's not something that you should pursue.
Right.
You know, and then we pathologize people that have either way too much or not enough. You know, and you know, just talking about ace people as well. They're victims of this as well. They don't, you know,
for people that don't know who ace folks are.
yeah, asexuality. Asexual folks,
Right.
like they're pathologized for not wanting it enough. You
Right,
know,
right.
like it's this weird Goldilocks zone of sexual behavior.
Yeah.
Anything outside of that is vice. And if your identity is wrapped up in one of those outside parameters,
Right.
you have to desexualize
Which
yourself.
is interesting, because then it almost, because a lot of the communities could be considered leftist as a default, but are contributing to the conservative narrative of only sex for procreation.
Because they have to.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're falling victim to the very narrative that they wanted to fight against to begin with. Blah.
They're conforming to the conservative.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what do we do? What can they do?
Well, what you and I have often talked about here on even Baking Naked and our show now is sex is okay, and wanting to be with someone for sexual reasons is okay. You're hooking up research that you're doing. The narrative that this is unhealthy and it causes all these psychological challenges, difficulties, and trauma and stuff. Yeah, if you see sex as traumatizing in and of itself, in other words, the narrative is sex is bad and you shouldn't pursue someone for that purpose, you're causing that problem, then you're going to have a problem with sex, right? If you have a problem with porn, you have a problem with porn, right? The same thing. If you have a problem with sex, you're going to have a problem with it.
Like your hang-ups are going to define your problem.
Your problem, right?
Yeah.
It's okay. It's if you are drawn to someone because of their genitals, that's okay, as long as be straightforward about it.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Sex is okay.
Yeah. And if you want to frame your kink in sex, that's okay.
It's okay.
You know, if you want to be a trans person who's also autogynephilic, that's okay.
Right.
And I believe in the trans community, like, there are people who are not autogynephilic that are trans, you know, but you don't have to separate yourself from those people who are,
Right.
you know, or cross-dressers. Like, does that need to be in the trans community? Maybe so, maybe not.
Yeah.
You know, maybe it is just a sexual behavior, but it's still okay, and it's still okay within the trans community.
You and I had this conversation a couple days ago about being able to be complex.
Yes.
You can have a trans identity. You can sexualize yourself or others, and you can be you. And you can exist in that continuum. It doesn't have to be black and white.
Yeah.
All of that is going to be okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
You don't have to cut a part of yourself off or a part of others' selves off. We both get that for the purposes of legitimation and to be free from violence and stigma, choices had to be made. But is there a part of us that can fight those narratives and say it's okay to sexualize, it's okay to have an identity, and it's okay for those all to coexist?
Right. I think so. I agree.
Yeah.
Right there.
Right.
It's okay for for you to be a complex person.
Yeah.
And have all those things
Right.
be recognized and legitimized.
Right.
You know, it's okay for you to love multiple people.
Yes.
And it's okay to fuck multiple people.
And for it to want to fuck multiple people.
And to acknowledge that both those exist within your identity.
Right.
That is okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then that can be, not only is that okay, that can be the forefront of your identity. You don't have to hide behind love. You can be in love,
Yeah,
absolutely. But you don't have to hide behind the narrative
Right.
for legitimation. You are legitimate because you want to fuck multiple people.
Right.
You are legitimate because you are trans and you also find yourself attractive, in that that autogynephilic framework. You are legitimate if you want to be, if you're a same-sex couple who is married who also wants to seek out other people, or your behavior with your partner is perfectly fine.
Right. And it's okay if you're a cross-dressing person who does feel a feminine essence or a masculine essence or what. All of this stuff can coexist together.
Right.
Right.
Right. You are legitimate.
You are legitimate.
You don't have to break yourself apart from your behavior and identity.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I don't know. Maybe I would love to see it, that echo within the communities. I don't know. It might not. Yeah. We might get called out for some other bullshit. I don't care.
What? I don't have anything to follow up.
Because like I said, it also impacts straight people.
Yes.
Whether we want to admit it or not.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, we got to stop. And admittedly, we're just as guilty. Yes. Like pointing fingers and calling pervs.
Well, okay, I don't identify as straight.
Yeah, I do.
Okay,
I do.
Yeah.
And
I'm a Kinsey 3-4.
Yeah, and we're by doing that is causing more damage to ourselves because no one has sex. There's no normal sex. Yeah. There's if you are and you want to do that, I don't want to shame I don't want to yuck anybody's yum, but if you are having quintessential man, woman, baby sex, good on you. But that's rare. The majority of sex that happens on this planet does not result in an offspring. Right. So we can't use that narrative anymore.
You see that. You see that problem in straight couples, long-term relationship bed death.
Yeah.
Where one person isn't interested in sex anymore, and the other one has to just give that part of themselves up.
Yeah.
So it does affect straight people because now the person who doesn't want to have sex anymore is pathologizing their partner. Or trying to erase their sexual desires. Right. So it does affect straight couples.
It absolutely affects straight couples. Yeah. But on that social political level, by us saying that is other.
Yes.
Suddenly if that's something we enjoy, then suddenly we're othering ourselves. Yeah. When really there is no other. It's just variation. Yeah. That's one thing Kinsey always said. It's all about variation. Yeah. And that's the true salient factor.
Continuum.
Yeah, across human existence is that variation is the only constant.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So
So back to our original message that we continue to come back to. Yeah. You're okay.
You're okay.
You're okay. Yeah.
All right.
So do we have future stuff? AVN is coming up.
It is.
So for those of you who don't know what AVN is the big adult industry convention that we have in Las Vegas every year. I have absolutely no idea where it is this year because
it's a Hard Rock.
I thought they just blew the Hard Rock up.
No.
Okay. Interesting. I didn't know Hard Rock existed anymore.
Yeah. They changed they got sold to Virgin.
Yes, I know, but as far as I know, they just demolished. They had a demolition.
No.
A week or two ago. Then I must have been asleep when I read that. We'll have to double check.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's a hard rock.
I'm not so sure that it is, but okay, we'll double check. So, but anyway, we've been talking to Billy Ward, who's our producer, and we're trying to figure out a way to do some episodes or put together an episode based on our experience at AVN. And then I was just actually notified when I came in today that Carol Queen, who's an amazing sexologist and lecturer, is coming to Vegas, and we're going to host her here at the museum.
Awesome.
And maybe have her on the show.
Oh, that'd be
so
great.
maybe we'll do an episode with Carol. She's, I think she still oversees the Vibrator Museum in San Francisco.
Okay.
And I think they're a part of Good Vibrations.
Oh.
Yeah. But we haven't worked any of the details out yet. But she did contact me today, and she's just a legend in the sexology community. So I think it would be great to have her on. Yeah.
Maybe that will like springboard us having
Yeah.
guests on the show.
Yeah, we could have an occasional guest here and there. Yeah.
So I asked the Google.
Okay.
It was the Hard Rock Cafe
That got
that was
blown up.
demolished.
Okay, that was blown up.
Not
Okay.
the casino.
Not the casino. Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. So it's still the Hard Rock
It's still
Casino.
the Hard Rock.
Well, then it'll be at the Hard Rock.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for letting me like throw these ideas around. I feel like
Sure.
I talked quite a bit today, but yeah, hopefully you all got something out of my ramblings, and maybe you're like, holy shit, he's right. I'm going to stop pointing fingers at people for doing weird kinky stuff because that impacts me.
Yeah.
And like maybe as a sexual community, we're like, no, we're going to advertise our sexual behavior without stigma.
Right.
And a flag, I don't know, or on the
Fingers crossed.
poster board, whatever. Yeah, who knows? Or, you know, or the like 100 people that see this and be like, oh, that's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
And they go on about their day.
Yeah. You know what? In any kind of situation, that I think could be the response that I would prefer the most, is having someone sit down and give it some thought for a little while and then get on with their day. That would be good.
That would be good.
Yeah, the outrage porn that's on social media is exhausting, and everybody's complaining about it and no one's stopping.
Yeah.
Just give it I get some things you don't want to put on, you don't want to, broadcast, you don't want to like give legitimacy to. I totally get that argument. But ideally, social media would be about stirring some thought and then getting on with your day. So, not to where you have to shut off Twitter for 3 days because your mental health is suffering so much because crazy.
Right.
Yeah. So.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us
Thanks
this
for joining
time
us
on
again.
Sex Pod,
Yeah.
the Sex Nerd
Podcast.
So you might have found us on YouTube. If you did, you could hit subscribe. That would be awesome.
Yes. We do have a Patreon.
We do have a Patreon that has our other show, Baking Naked, on it.
It does not.
It does not. Okay.
No. Baking Naked is on bakingnakedshow.com.
BakingNakedShow.com.
And all of the episodes are public.
They are public now.
They are public.
You can see, really?
Yes.
When did that happen?
Oh, God, like a month ago.
What?
Yes. You were traveling.
I was traveling. So they don't have to pay for the show?
No.
Uncensored?
Yes. But just on bakingnakedshow.com.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. Our Sex Nerd podcast is on our Patreon at Sex Nerd Pod.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And on YouTube. And we also
And
have
Vimeo.
Twitter.
And Vimeo.
And
I
Vimeo.
haven't been using the Twitter. I think that's in your control.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm terrible at Twitter.
You're going to have to stop
Yeah.
being terrible.
We also have Facebook.
Yes.
Sex Nerd Podcast.
Yep.
Facebook.
Yeah. So, and we have our Instagram.
Yeah. And don't get confused. When you go to YouTube and you're like Sex Nerd something or other.
It's Sex Nerd Podcast.
It's Sex Nerd Podcast. There's another.
And you can see our logo when you search for us.
Yeah. So look for the logo.
So it looks for the logo. Yeah.
More than likely, you already found it. If you send it to somebody, tell them to look for the logo.
Yes.
Yeah.
Purple logo.
Purple logo.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So next time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and actually, we hosted on sexnerdpod.com Numbnuts November.
Numbnuts.
Numbnuts November is part of Your Real Brain on Porn. Your Brain on Porn. They had Numbnuts November, which was masturbate until you're numb and have a good time.
Okay.
We did host that.
Okay.
That was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that ended at the end of November.
Right.
Because
Now it's just
December.
cold and our nuts are numb because of that.
Yeah. I think December has some kind of masturbation theme, but I have no idea what it is.
The 12 days of Christmas?
Yeah, 12 days of masturbation.
12 days of masturbation?
Yeah. Give yourself an orgasm for Christmas.
Yeah.
For
so
the
on
holidays.
the 12th day of Christmas, 12 times?
Oh, wow.
That'll
Then you
happen.
would be numb.
Should work that out.
Yeah. Use a womanizer. It's a lot less impactful than a vibrator.
Yeah.
No, we are not
Lube,
sponsored
lube,
by
lube.
them.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.